Cool. So let's try to make this a little bit interactive. Wake up. I'm super surprised actually that you are here. You should be in the bed, hangover, rolling over, crazy. But I'm flattered. So yeah, I guess we can make this a little bit more like a discussion to liven things up. So do interrupt me anytime if you have a question, want to jump into more details in some things. What I'm going to focus on in terms of so I have to stand here. What I was asked to focus on is basically the first period of building a startup. How do you navigate the uncertainty, the crazy period, and then make sense of it all? And I have been doing it for years and basically made all the mistakes you can do and do it again, and then try to make it the right way. So all of the tips I would love to share with you are based on my personal experience, how me going through what you shouldn't be going through, you shouldn't be doing. So that's going to be my slides. But a little bit of context. So some 5 years ago, I started Funderful with the idea of helping universities fundraise more from their alumni. The product essentially is AI-driven conversational virtual assistant. So that virtual assistant talks to alumni, talks to potential students, and helps the alumni get faster to making a donation or coming to a reunion, and potential students find a faster way to become a student, start studying. So clearly a digital marketing tool, and we're using such channels like Messenger, web chat, SMS, combined with ads. So that's what we're doing. And we spent most of 2017 to be in Silicon Valley, be part of 500Startups, one of the top accelerators, and go through that grinding machine to figure out the product market fit and go to market. Yeah, and these are some of the clients we've been working with. You see Berkeley, Georgetown, Oxford, Cambridge, London Business School, West Point, and the list goes a little on. And yeah, a few weeks back we made an exit, so made a full cycle of having these 5 years of starting a startup, going to accelerator, trying to figure out sales, and then finally exiting the company to the market leader in our space, who has thousands of customers as universities and can take the technology to a much larger impact, much quicker to the market. So yeah, I think this is a super useful way to look at things. What are the top reasons why startups fail? It's the three reasons are no market need. You haven't figured out, like, you're not solving a problem properly or big enough problem, or you're running out of cash, or you don't have the right team. And there could be all kinds of things that could go wrong, but this is useful to have a look how you can reduce the uncertainty, basically make sure that you are doing things right to reduce this risk of failing. For me personally, actually, most startups will fail. If you try to start your own venture, what would have helped me as advice is the notion that probably my own startup will also fail. Well, that's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's statistics. You shouldn't be an exception. You should be embracing that uncertainty that what you're starting most probably, not a chance, but most probably will fail. Well, what that does is basically it takes all your anxiety away, that you should have the pressure of succeeding no matter what. You're doing it might end up succeeding, it might not end up succeeding, but that's a good way to start at it. And this is a typical startup journey, how you get pumped up with the idea, thinking that within 12 months we'll get a big return on all our savings that we're putting in, and we'll be cash flow positive and ruling the world. But when you get to your minimum viable product, you start seeing that, well, it's not as fluffy as you thought, and clients are not buying or are not really getting that kind of value as you expected. So it's a long, uncertain, bumpy road ahead. How do you figure out you have a product that actually is useful for the market? So I'm going to be focusing on that. And this is actually super useful to keep in mind, to not rush ahead with scaling too fast, with thinking that all you need to do is grow the startup and that's what matters. Actually, no, you have to take it step at a time and figure out what's the next milestone you need to accomplish. So that's my first recommendation: know your milestones. And these are a couple of frameworks that I found useful from 500Startups, but I didn't apply that from early on. I was basically, all we were doing is, this is basically, I put all my savings in, and this was an actual cash balance that I was showing month on month to my team. Basically, we had a tradition every month: hey, here's our cash, here's, you can't really make a prediction out of this, but yeah, this is what we're doing. We should maybe change things up. What can we do? No pressure. So yeah, that was quite fun and stressful. But the notion I had in mind then was, oh, all we have to do is get more clients, and that's how you solve the problem. Well, no, you don't. And that is the hardest part. You don't go for the market. You don't try to sell yet. You have to have that discipline to cut those milestones and start with something more basic. And this is a super useful framework to think about those milestones. So any kind of startup that starts with an idea would have roughly these kind of stages. So you start off with what you would call customer discovery or customer development, and you don't develop a product then. You don't have a product. You don't show the users your product. You just try to figure out the pain points. And you don't grow. The next stage is, okay, you know the pain now. You try to figure out what could be that minimum product you want to show them, and validate your assumptions that you got out of this research. Again, you don't grow. Even though this graph shows you're growing, in reality it's like ups and downs. You're still not growing. And you start to grow only in the last stage. So to make it succeed, you would want to push as far off the growth as possible. It's counterintuitive, but it pays off significantly, because if you are spending a year on developing a product that the market doesn't need, or your clients are churning, or some reason you're not finding that perfect fit, you'll have to come back to drawing board anyway later. You just have otherwise would have saved your time. And this what I found really useful. It was one of the fundraising sessions at 500Startups. One of the partners was saying, look guys, your investors, if they're great, they'll be looking at your company like this kind of bingo card. Like this is what they'll be looking at you, holding in their head and thinking, okay, what do you have, what you don't have? And this is also useful down the road when you are hitting your next milestone. What is the risk you want to address? What is the risk you want to reduce? For your first funding, you might have a stable team, you might have figured out a problem in a big market, and you might already have something of a great product, something that is exciting and works actually. But you might not have a complete team, you might not have a product market fit that, or the people are, even if they're using, there's high churn, you can be easily copied, you don't have any users, customers are not paying you, you don't have any idea about any economics, how much it will cost to get another customer and how much they'll be paying. You don't know any of this, you don't have any of that. Still, investors should be funding you because you have some great things, and only over the time, over the next milestones will you be completing each and every next step. So this is also very useful for you to not rush ahead of yourselves. So that's number one. Now you figured out what is that But after the first milestone, the tip, I would say you would start with learning about the customer, right? And this is basically called customer development. This is one of the best resources I've ever found and applied. It's from customerdevlabs.com. So basically, you start with qualitative interviews. It's a specially designed script for B2B, B2C. You just copy it, include your company name, and you're good to go pretty much. What you'll figure out is, okay, after 20 interviews, some patterns start emerging, and you're seeing, okay, there's some pain points that are repeating. Now, you don't want to go ahead with concluding that that's the product we have to build. You want to have a more quantitative conclusion as well. And that doesn't cost you too much, but doing that research will reap the rewards later on. You know what you will be building. You will know what the next feature is. But you can do the surveying, the quantitative analysis in quite a few ways. Well, the typical way you would see on the left, it's basically, it's hard for you to see, but it's basically asking from a scale of 1 to 10, least interested, most interested, least important, most important. How do you rank this feature? How do you rank this pain that you have? And you expect that you'll get a meaningful response. Well, you shouldn't be doing that, because what will end up happening is, if most people will say, well, all of these things are mostly important, and when you put together the summary, you'll end up with no conclusion at all. You will see that everything is important, but you will not have the resources to build everything in the first day. You need to know what is that most important thing. So what you would want to do instead is force your audience, force your potential customers to choose. They can only choose one important thing, and they have to let go of one least important thing. So you basically tell them which is most preferred, least preferred. And you don't care about the middle. Doesn't really matter. But what you will get in the end is something like this, a summary of, let's say, 1,000 respondents, and you'll know that a couple of features are super critical, and for now, you forget about the rest. They don't really matter. They will not define success of your first traction. You'll be spending your resource on something that is truly pushing the needle. And yeah, I suggest Price Intelligently. They are really great at giving tips how you actually practically run these kind of customer discovery. And obviously, startups are all about growth. You have all these tips of how do you grow a startup, and it's overwhelming, yeah? But actually, you don't want to rush ahead with growing, as I mentioned, that startups are not all about growing. You want to not grow too early. You want to delay that further on. You want to make sure you have figured out that fit, and some of the two metrics that you could be looking. I'll show you some of the metrics just now. So this is, you essentially want to first get product market fit, and then delay all of the growth to a later stage. Until you find product market fit, you don't think about growth yet. So the goal is to see that the market is actually finding your product useful. Only later will it be important for you to have a model, a sales engine that you can repeat, you can scale. Then the metrics that you will be measuring before product market fit is engagement and retention, whether customers are coming back, whether they're actually using your product, and only later will you be looking at the growth rate of how many new users or customers you are actually able to get. The method for the first stage is super chaotic. You are hustling. It's nothing scalable really, but it's unstructured. And only later will you be having a more scalable, adding processes and measuring things. And in terms of data, yeah, you'll be using a bit of both, but the bigger focus is on qualitative early. These kind of interviews, or some of the users start complaining, and then you act on that, as opposed to later when you'll be using more quantitative. And obviously, in both stages, you want to be super quick at learning. So this is something based on the. I've done the totally opposite. I've been thinking and putting resource over time that okay, I need to already have some predictable growth, adding processes and figuring out sales before we actually have product market fit. So that's just to save you time. You should be rather putting your efforts in the first column. And these are some of the questions I found super useful. They're called R metrics, or R pilot metrics. So acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. So basically, it becomes a funnel. And the questions you should be asking every time you are thinking about a product and the product market fit is, how do your users find you, or you find them? Are they having that first great experience? Are they activating their, and do they come back? How do you actually make money, and do they tell others? Now, initially you would probably have a broken bucket. At every stage you would have it leaking. Nothing would be, it will be bad conversion rate from top to bottom. But what is interesting, well, you have that limited resource, where do you focus your attention first? And this is again coming back to that price intelligently. They did a survey of hundreds of SaaS companies and, well, not survey, but research, and they were looking at a 1% improvement in which part of the funnel, in acquisition, the upper part, in retention, the middle part, or monetization, basically the lower part of the funnel. Which part, a 1% increase, will yield the highest return? And actually it was monetization, the lower part of the funnel. So essentially, you would want to focus your attention first on the very bottom of the funnel, where you are closing your deals, where you're thinking about pricing. Deal with that first, that will have highest impact, as opposed to thinking where do you find new users, or how do you retain them. So this is also useful to think about where do you put your limited resources. And then, okay, you've done all this work. How do you decide, how do you figure out that, okay, I've found that product market fit, I can now move to the next stage of the startup development? And there are a couple of ways how you can do that. This is something that I've found useful to be asking is, how would you feel if you could no longer use this product? And ask that to your users, and whether that's very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not really, it wasn't that useful. Now, if you have a picture like on the left, that most people say not really disappointed, that means that you haven't hit that product market fit. You have to go back to drawing board and basically come back to asking them what is that pain point that is so important to them that you are not addressing. And if it's very disappointed or somewhat disappointed and around 40%, that's the metric you want to hit with very disappointed 40%. That means that you are super close to product market fit. And then a couple of other tips I would suggest is always, if you have a global ambitions, you are thinking, okay, the next round investors will probably want me to incorporate in Delaware or somewhere where it's a standard practice to have startups incorporated. Well, initially you don't have to think about it, because you just incorporate wherever it's easiest, set up a simple limited company, and you'll deal with that later. You can easily do a flip later, legal flip of ownership, and that could cost you $50K if you ask a full service legal team to be doing that. But you can also bootstrap and make sure to do it at around $4K. That's not a big price to pay, and would suggest to delay that. But when you are ready to incorporate, for example, in Delaware, to set up a standard company, deal with all the taxes, with opening a bank account, I would strongly recommend Stripe Atlas program. I didn't have to travel anywhere to open a bank account in Silicon Valley Bank. So that's super useful, and that's for free. And then one of the three things was that, one of the top 3 reasons was that startups fail is that you don't have the right team. Based on my bitter experience, I would strongly suggest that for your founders, for your team, do vesting. Don't give or split those shares immediately. You want to, there will always be founder fallout risks, and one founder walking away for one reason, other for other reason. You don't want to deal with what do you do with your shares, what does everyone do with their shares at that point. You want to have already dealt with that previously. So vesting, basically, you earn your shares. Everyone earns the shares over time, is something that you should be doing. Also, what I've found super useful is it's super hard to have a bird's eye view when you are dealing with the everyday issues, everyday problems. So you want to see the big picture. And what helps you see the big picture is if you have someone who has, as a founder, who has gone through that hell, that bumpy road before, and is at a later stage. You want to have them as a mentor, so that will help you get the big picture and hopefully get less shit hitting the fan. It will still hit, but less maybe. And then finally, my advice number 7, tip number 7, is find that balance. You will have so much pressure with running your startup. It's super exhausting at times. It's exhilarating, but and the stress will obviously spill over to family. You can always start a new startup, but with family, that's a little bit more complicated. So if shit really hits the fan, know where your priorities are. That's it from me, but yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Good ending.
Thank you, Raimonds. So we have 3 minutes for some questions. So is anybody ready to ask some tough question to Raimonds? Right there.
Oh, my wife. Damn. What did I do?
I want to know how do investors differ? I mean, when you pitch them, how do Baltic investors differ from US investors or Baltic investors from each other? When you pitch them for investing in Funderful?
I think all investors are pretty much equal. They don't know about your business. They have little attention span. So what helps is assuming that investors are you're talking to a 5-year-old. So you want to simplify all the things you're saying. So that's rule number 1. I think it applies to everywhere, what I've seen. And I've had the chance to work with fantastic investors across Baltics and Silicon Valley. And actually, those that have been closest to Riga have been the most helpful when it is the hardest times.
And can I have one more additional question? So is it possible to grow with skipping the Baltic investors and get immediately the US investors? The large-sized ones.
I think you can do that. You can skip and then go after other investors abroad. But why would you? You want to start where you want the easiest route, and starting where you have your existing network, that kind of already trust there. You can already walk across the street and meet them. Then why not there?
I think Raimonds said himself that Estonian investors are very happy to invest in Latvian startups.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest to everyone. Do be friendly with Estonian investors. They are angel investors. They are super interested in Latvian startups, and they have at times been super great help. And because many of them have gone through as founders through the whole same process, so that can be very useful.
Raimond, thank you for the great presentation. Hope to work with you at some point. My question is, what's your next big thing? Can you share?
Thank you. My next big thing is not going into startups. That's fucking hard. No startups, please. That's been quite a ride for 5 years. You can have only so much energy. So my next big thing is recharging finally.
Any more questions? I have one. You mentioned the downward cash spiral.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously you need to motivate your team. How do you motivate your team at that stage when you're 5,000 euros in your bank?
Well, you don't, and that's the shit hitting the fan. You stress. you come in and then you don't like coming into work because you have that responsibility that the other team members also sense that, okay, I have to stress now, everyone is grumpy, so that doesn't help.
Somehow you got through.
But that's where those kind of founder-to-founder conversations, having a mentor or friends with other founders and having a chance to just vent is super important. So do see startups as a super closed community. We have actually a fantastic closed community. We have these kind of conversations among each other, and we are sharing openly, helping without expecting to get help in return, right?
Exactly. All right, big applause for Raimonds, and thanks for sharing his story.
You're great. Thanks.